This house no longer belongs to you, ma'am. The judge's gavel came down hard, the sound echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot that ended my 35-year marriage in one brutal syllable. He slid the property deed across his bench toward my husband Raymond, who sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, not looking at me. Not once during the entire hearing had he turned his head in my direction. Not once had he acknowledged my existence. We'd shared a bed for 35 years, raised 2 children together, built a life brick by brick, and now he couldn't even meet my eyes while he stole our home out from under me. I'm Vivian, and until 10 minutes ago, I thought I owned half of a 200-square-meter house in the suburbs, where I'd raised my children, planted my garden, built my entire identity, the house where my daughter had taken her first steps in the living room, where my son had learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays and holidays and all the small moments that make up a life. Now I was being told that house had been sold 3 months ago without my knowledge or consent. The signature on the deed looked like mine. Same loops on the V, same slight tilt to the right, same pressure on the downstrokes, but I had never signed that document. I had never agreed to sell. I had never even known there was a sale happening until the eviction notice arrived last week, delivered by a process server who couldn't meet my eyes when he handed me the papers. The courtroom felt surreal, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The court reporter's fingers clicked steadily on her machine, recording every word of my humiliation for posterity. The bailiff stood by the door looking bored, another property dispute in an endless stream of property disputes, nothing special about the woman whose life was being dismantled in real time. Your Honor, my lawyer said, standing quickly, his chair scraping against the floor, we object to this ruling in the strongest possible terms. My client maintains emphatically and under oath that her signature was forged. We formally request a forensic examination of the document by an independent expert before any transfer of property is finalized. This is a matter of due process. The document has already been examined, the judge said, shuffling papers with the casual efficiency of a man who'd seen 1,000 cases just like this. The county recorder's office verified the signature against Mrs. Patterson's driver's license and previous property documents. Their assessment is that the signatures match within acceptable parameters. With all due respect, Your Honor, matching isn't the same as authentic. Forensic document examination is a specialized field. The county recorder's office performs administrative verification, not forensic analysis. They look for obvious discrepancies, not the subtle markers that distinguish a genuine signature from a skilled forgery. My client was not present when this document was allegedly signed. She has no memory of signing it. She has never met the notary who supposedly witnessed her signature. And the date on the deed, March 15th of this year, was the same day her husband was undergoing emergency surgery at Mercy General Hospital. She spent 14 hours at his bedside that day, from the moment the ambulance arrived until he was stable in the recovery room. She couldn't possibly have been at a title company signing away her home while simultaneously holding her husband's hand in a surgical waiting room. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly, the first sign of interest he'd shown in my case. Is there documentation of this hospital visit? Extensive documentation, Your Honor. My lawyer opened his briefcase and produced a thick folder, the product of 2 weeks of frantic preparation since we'd learned about the forged deed. Hospital records showing Mr. Raymond Patterson was admitted for emergency gallbladder surgery on March 15th at 5:23 a.m. Surgical logs showing the procedure began at 8:45 a.m. and concluded at 11:32 a.m. Recovery room records showing he was monitored until 6 p.m. Visitor logs showing Mrs. Vivian Patterson signed in at 6:47 a.m., less than 90 minutes after her husband's admission, and signed out at 9:12 p.m., after he was stable and sleeping. Cafeteria receipts from that day showing purchases at 12:15 p.m., 3:45 p.m., and 7:30 p.m., all from the hospital cafeteria on the 3rd floor. Parking garage timestamps showing her car entered at 6:38 a.m. and exited at 9:27 p.m. Cell phone records showing her device pinged towers, consistent with the hospital's location throughout the entire day. My client has an ironclad alibi for every single hour of the day. This signature was supposedly executed. She could not have been physically present at the title company. He handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The judge flipped through the pages slowly, his expression unreadable. I watched him read the documentation of the worst day of my life, the day I'd sat in that sterile waiting room for 3 hours, terrified that Raymond wouldn't survive the surgery, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in, making desperate bargains with the universe to spare my husband's life. Raymond's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, the plaintiff acknowledges that the timing is unusual. However, we have a notarized document with proper witnesses. The sale was conducted through a licensed real estate agency. The buyer, Mrs. Helen Okonkwo, is a respected member of the real estate community with an impeccable reputation. To suggest that this entire transaction was fraudulent is to accuse multiple professionals of serious crimes. Helen Okonkwo, my son's mother-in-law. The woman who had smiled at me across the Thanksgiving table last year, complimented my cooking, asked for my pie recipe. The woman who had helped plan my son's wedding, who had welcomed me into her family, who had called me sister at the reception. That woman had bought my house out from under me, using a forged signature, and now she sat in the gallery behind Raymond, her face perfectly composed, as if she were watching a mildly interesting television program. Your Honor, I said, standing before my lawyer could stop me. May I speak? The judge looked surprised. This is unusual, Mrs. Patterson. You have legal representation. I understand, but I need to say something directly, because this is my life we're discussing, and I won't let other people speak for me anymore. He considered for a moment, then nodded. Keep it brief. I turned to face the courtroom. My husband sat rigid at the plaintiff's table, still refusing to look at me. Helen Okonkwo watched from the gallery with those calm, calculating eyes. My son Derek wasn't there. He hadn't answered my calls in 2 weeks, not since I'd confronted him about the sale, and he told me to let it go, Mom. It's complicated. I lived in that house for 32 years, I said. I raised 2 children there. I buried a dog in the backyard and planted roses over the grave. I hosted birthday parties and graduation celebrations and holiday dinners. I paid the mortgage alongside my husband for 3 decades. That house isn't just property to me. It's my history, it's my identity. And someone stole it from me, using a signature that isn't mine, on a day when I was holding my husband's hand while he came out of anesthesia. I pointed at Helen. That woman bought my house. She's a real estate agent. She knows exactly how property transfers work. She knows that both spouses have to sign off on a sale. She knows the legal requirements. And yet somehow, a document with my forged signature ended up in her possession, and now she owns the home where I was supposed to spend my retirement. I want to know why. I want to know who forged my signature, and I want to know why. My husband is sitting at that table trying to take everything from me instead of standing beside me demanding answers. The courtroom was silent. Raymond still wouldn't look at me. Helen's expression hadn't changed. The judge cleared his throat. Mrs. Patterson, I appreciate your passion, but the court deals in evidence, not emotion. The document before me appears legally valid. If you believe fraud occurred, the appropriate remedy is a criminal complaint, not a property dispute hearing. So you're going to let them steal my house, I said flatly. I'm going to rule based on the evidence presented, the judge said. And based on that evidence, the property was legally transferred 3 months ago. If subsequent investigation proves fraud, the transfer can be reversed. But until then, Mrs. Okonkwo is the legal owner of the property at 847 Maple Drive. The gavel came down again. My lawyer gathered his papers, already talking about appeals and criminal referrals and next steps, but I stood frozen, staring at the back of my husband's head, waiting for him to turn around and explain. He never did. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air was sharp and cold. My lawyer walked me to a bench near the parking lot, his face grim. I'm sorry, Vivian, that didn't go the way I'd hoped. What happens now? I asked. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. We file a criminal complaint for forgery and fraud. We request a full forensic analysis of the signature. We subpoena the notary and witnesses to the signing. We build a case proving you couldn't have signed that document. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you can't live in that house. Helen Okonkwo has legal ownership. If you stay, she can have you arrested for trespassing. Trespassing. In my own home. In the house where I'd spent 32 years building a life. Where am I supposed to go? I asked. Do you have family? Friends who could take you in? I thought about Derek, my son, who wasn't answering my calls. I thought about my daughter Melissa, who lived in Seattle and had her own family to worry about. I thought about my sister Carol in Florida, my college roommate Janet in Chicago, the network of relationships I'd built over 63 years. None of them were here. None of them could give me back what I'd lost. I'll figure something out, I said. My lawyer handed me a folder. These are copies of all the documents from today's hearing, including the deed with the forged signature. Study them, see if anything stands out. Sometimes the details reveal more than the big picture. I took the folder and watched him walk away. Then I sat alone on that bench, the courthouse looming behind me, my whole life scattered like leaves in the wind. The folder contained more than I'd expected, not just the deed, but supporting documents, the original listing agreement, the purchase offer, the inspection report, the closing statement. Every step of the sale had been documented, every detail recorded, every signature authenticated. It looked completely legitimate. It looked like I had willingly sold my home and walked away with nothing. The buyer's information was there too. Helen Okonkwo, represented by Okonkwo Realty, the company she'd founded 20 years ago. She'd bought the house for $400,000, about $50,000 below market value, which suggested she'd known exactly what she was doing. The money had been wired to an account I didn't recognize, not the joint account Raymond and I had shared for decades. I pulled out my phone and called Raymond. It went straight to voicemail. I called Derek. Same thing. I called Helen's office number, the one printed on the documents, and got a receptionist who told me Mrs. Okonkwo was unavailable and would return my call at her earliest convenience. I sat on that bench until the sun started to set, reading and rereading the documents, trying to find the flaw in the machine that had stolen my life. And finally, on my third pass through the closing statement, I found something strange. The notary who had witnessed my signature was named Patricia Vance. Her license number was listed, along with her commission expiration date. I pulled up the state notary database on my phone and searched for her name. Patricia Vance's notary commission had expired 2 years ago. She was no longer authorized to notarize documents in this state. I called my lawyer immediately. The notary's license was expired. I told him, Patricia Vance, her commission ended 2 years before she witnessed my signature. The entire document is invalid. Are you sure? He sounded suddenly energized. Send me the documentation. If you're right, this changes everything. I photographed the closing statement and the notary database results and sent them over. Then I sat back and waited, my heart pounding with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. My lawyer called back within the hour. You're right, he said. Patricia Vance's commission expired in 2022. She had no authority to notarize that document. This is grounds for immediate invalidation of the sale. So, I get my house back? It's not that simple, he said. We still have to prove the signature was forged, but this gives us leverage. An expired notary suggests the entire transaction was rushed or sloppy. It suggests corners were cut. It suggests fraud. What's the next step? I file an emergency motion tomorrow morning. We present this evidence to the judge and request an immediate stay on the property transfer. If we're lucky, we can freeze everything until the criminal investigation is complete. And if we're not lucky? Then we keep fighting, he said. But Vivian, this is good news. This is the first crack in their case. Where there's one crack, there are usually more. I hung up and sat in my car, staring at nothing. One crack, one small piece of evidence that something was wrong, but I needed more than cracks. I needed to understand why this had happened, why my husband had turned against me, why my son wasn't returning my calls, why Helen Okonkwo had targeted my home specifically. I drove to Helen's office. Okonkwo Realty occupied a sleek building in the business district, all glass and chrome and expensive landscaping. The receptionist tried to stop me, but I pushed past her and walked straight into Helen's corner office. She was sitting behind her desk, phone pressed to her ear, looking exactly as composed as she had in the courtroom. When she saw me, she said something quick into the phone and hung up. Vivian, she said. I was wondering when you'd show up. Why? I asked. Why did you steal my house? I didn't steal anything, she said. I purchased a property through legal channels. If there were irregularities in the paperwork, that's not my responsibility. The notary's license was expired. The signature was forged. You knew exactly what you were doing. Helen leaned back in her chair. What I know is that your husband came to me 3 months ago with a problem. He needed money quickly. He needed to sell the house without you knowing. He said you'd never agree to it, that you were too attached to the property, that you'd fight him every step of the way. So he asked me to help. And you agreed, I said. You agreed to help him steal from me. I agreed to facilitate a transaction that he initiated, she said. Raymond found the notary. Raymond arranged the signing. Raymond told me you'd agreed to the sale, but couldn't be present because of a family emergency. I had no reason to doubt him. He's your husband. He's my daughter's father-in-law. Why would he lie about something so serious? So you're saying Raymond did this? Raymond forged my signature. Raymond found an expired notary. Raymond sold our house without my knowledge or consent. I'm saying Raymond handled the details, Helen said carefully. What he told me and what actually happened may be two different things, but I acted in good faith based on the information I was given. I stared at her, trying to read the truth behind her careful words. She was a successful businesswoman, a skilled negotiator, a master of plausible deniability. She knew exactly how to position herself as an innocent bystander while the real villain took the fall. Where's the money? I asked. $400,000. Where did it go? To the account Raymond specified, she said. I have the wire transfer records if you need them. I need them, I said. She printed out a document and handed it to me. The receiving account was at a bank I didn't recognize, under a name I'd never seen, Lighthouse Holdings LLC. What is Lighthouse Holdings? I asked. I have no idea, Helen said. Raymond set up the account. You'd have to ask him. He won't talk to me, I said. Neither will Derek. Did you know that? Your daughter's husband won't return his own mother's calls. Something flickered across Helen's face. Surprise, maybe, or discomfort. I didn't know that, she said. Derek and Sandra have been distant lately. I assumed it was marital stress. It's not marital stress, I said. It's this. Whatever this conspiracy is, Derek is part of it. He told me to let it go when I asked about the sale. Like losing my home was something I should just accept. Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Vivian, I think you should talk to Raymond. Really talk to him. There's something going on that neither of us fully understands. I thought I was helping a friend restructure his finances. But if Derek is involved, if the money went somewhere I don't recognize, if all of this is connected to something bigger, she trailed off. Then what? Then maybe we've both been played, she said. I left her office more confused than when I'd arrived. Helen had seemed genuinely surprised by some of what I'd told her. Either she was an excellent actress with decades of practice, or she really hadn't known the full scope of what Raymond was doing. But even if she'd been manipulated like the rest of us, that didn't excuse her participation. She'd bought my house for $50,000 below market value. She'd accepted paperwork that any competent realtor should have questioned. She'd benefited from the fraud, regardless of whether she'd orchestrated it. I drove back to my house, the house that was no longer legally mine, and sat in the driveway for a long time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The lights were off inside. Raymond's car wasn't there. The garden I'd tended for 3 decades was starting to show signs of neglect, weeds creeping into the flower beds, leaves accumulating on the walkway, tomato plants drooping on their stakes. I had a key. It was still my house in every way that mattered, even if the legal system disagreed. But I was afraid to use that key. If Helen called the police, I could be arrested for trespassing. If Raymond was inside, I didn't know what I'd say to him, so I sat in my car, watching the house I'd loved for 32 years grow darker as the sun disappeared. When I was a little girl, my mother used to tell me that home wasn't a building, it was the people inside. Walls and floors don't make a home, she'd say, tucking me into bed in the small apartment where I'd grown up. Love makes a home. Family makes a home. You can build a home anywhere, as long as you have the people who matter. I'd believed her then. I believed her now. But I also believed that some buildings absorbed the love you poured into them. Some walls remembered the laughter and tears and quiet moments. Some floors knew the weight of your footsteps, the patterns you walked, the routes you took from bedroom to kitchen to garden. This house knew me. This house had held 32 years of my life within its walls, and now someone was trying to take it from me. My phone rang. I grabbed it, expecting Derek, expecting bad news, expecting the next blow in a fight I didn't understand, but the caller ID showed an unknown number. I answered anyway. Mrs. Patterson, a woman's voice, professional and clipped. This is Patricia Vance. I understand you've been asking questions about a document I notarized. Patricia Vance. The notary with the expired license, the woman whose signature had validated a fraud. Yes, I said carefully. I have questions. I imagine you do. There was a pause. I'm not supposed to talk to you. Raymond's lawyer has been very clear about that, but there are things you should know. Things I think you deserve to hear. What things? Another pause. Not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow? There's a park on the east side of town, near the old mill. I'll be on the bench by the fountain at noon. How do I know this isn't a trap? I asked. You don't, she admitted. But I'm not your enemy. Mrs. Patterson, I'm a woman who made a mistake, and I'd like to make it right if I can. She hung up before I could ask anything else. I met Patricia Vance the next day at the park she'd specified. She was older than I'd expected, mid-60s, with gray hair and nervous eyes that darted around the park as if expecting someone to jump out of the bushes. She was clutching a large purse, like a shield. Thank you for coming, she said when I sat down beside her. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, I admitted. What do you want to tell me? She opened her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. This is everything I have. Copies of documents, emails, records of conversations, proof that I knew my notary license had expired and did the job anyway. Why? I asked. Why would you risk your career for a forged document? Because Raymond paid me $20,000, she said, her voice flat with shame. Because my husband had just died and the medical bills had wiped out our savings. Because I was desperate and scared, and Raymond made it sound so simple. Just witness a signature, he said. The wife knows all about it. She just can't be there because of a family emergency. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But you knew your license was expired. Yes, she wouldn't meet my eyes. I knew. I told Raymond, and he said it didn't matter. He said no one ever checks those things. He said by the time anyone noticed, the sale would be complete, and it would be too late to unwind it. He was wrong, obviously, but I wanted to believe him. $20,000 is a lot of money when you're drowning. I looked at the envelope in her hands. What's in there exactly? Emails from Raymond setting up the meeting, bank records showing his payment to me, my own notes from the day of the signing. I always keep notes, even when I shouldn't, and a recording. A recording? Of my conversation with Raymond, the day before the signing. I recorded it because something felt wrong. I wanted insurance in case things went bad. She handed me the envelope. It did go bad, and now I'm giving you the insurance. I opened the envelope and pulled out a flash drive. This is the recording? Yes. Raymond specifically says on the tape that his wife doesn't know about the sale. He specifically says the signature will be forged. He specifically says it has to be done quickly because he's leaving the country soon. She finally met my eyes, and I saw genuine remorse there. I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson. I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I did it anyway. I can't undo that, but I can give you the evidence you need to undo what he did. Why now? I asked. Why come forward after all this time? Because I saw the news about your court case, she said. Because I saw you standing outside the courthouse, looking devastated. Because I realized I'd helped destroy an innocent woman's life for $20,000, and I couldn't live with that anymore. She stood up. I've already talked to the district attorney. They're going to offer me a plea deal in exchange for my testimony against Raymond. I'll probably lose my pension and face some probation, but at least I'll be able to sleep at night. She walked away without another word. I sat on the bench, clutching the envelope, feeling hope bloom in my chest for the first time in weeks. The recording was everything Patricia had promised. Raymond's voice, clear and unmistakable, explaining exactly how the fraud would work. My wife has no idea, he said. She's at the hospital with me, worried sick about my surgery. She won't find out until it's too late. By then, the money will be offshore and I'll be in Miami. She'll never see a dime. I played that recording for my lawyer, who played it for the district attorney, who presented it to a grand jury. Raymond was arrested 2 weeks later, pulled over on the highway, heading toward the Mexican border with a suitcase full of cash and a plane ticket to the Cayman Islands. Carla wasn't in the car with him. She'd apparently decided to cut her losses when the legal troubles mounted. Smart woman, in her own way. Smarter than Raymond, who'd somehow convinced himself he could outrun the consequences of 3 years of fraud. The house reverted to my name within a month. The sale was invalidated, the deed was voided, and Helen returned my $400,000 with a personal apology and a promise to be more careful in the future. I should have asked more questions, she said. I should have verified everything instead of trusting Raymond. I'm sorry. You were manipulated, I told her. We all were, but thank you for leaving the breadcrumbs that helped me find my way back. I've been trying to reach you for 2 weeks, I said. You haven't returned a single call. I know. I'm sorry. Things have been complicated. Can you meet me tomorrow? There's a coffee shop on 5th Street, the one with the blue awning, 9 a.m. Why can't we talk now? Because I need to show you something, he said, and I need to do it in person. Please, Mom, just meet me tomorrow. I'll explain everything. He hung up before I could ask more questions. I sat in the driveway for another hour, watching darkness settle over the house I'd lost, wondering what my son could possibly show me that would explain any of this. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived. The next morning, just a few early risers hunched over laptops and newspapers. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, normally comforting, but today just another detail in a world that had stopped making sense. Derek was already there, sitting at a corner table far from the windows, his laptop open and a thick manila folder beside him. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles carved deep under his eyes, clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them for days. Maybe he had. Maybe he'd been as consumed by this nightmare as I was. He stood when he saw me enter, and before I could say anything, he pulled me into a hug. A real hug, tight and desperate, the kind he used to give me when he was a little boy scared of thunderstorms. He held on longer than he had in years, his shoulders shaking slightly, and I realized with a start that he was crying. I'm sorry, Mom, he said into my shoulder, his voice muffled and broken. I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner. I should have known something was wrong. I should have asked more questions instead of just trusting him. I'm sorry. For what? I asked, pulling back to look at his face. The guilt there was staggering, deeper than I'd ever seen. Derek. What's going on? What could possibly make you look like this? He gestured for me to sit, glancing around the coffee shop as if checking for eavesdroppers. Then he turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a bank statement, professional looking, with a corporate letterhead I didn't recognize. The account name read Lighthouse Holdings LLC, and the balance made my heart stop. Over $400,000. My money. The money from my house. Dad set this up 2 years ago, Derek said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lighthouse Holdings. He told me it was an investment vehicle, a way to diversify our family's assets while minimizing tax liability. He made it sound so reasonable, so smart. He asked me to be a silent partner, just my name on some paperwork, nothing more. He said it would benefit everyone in the family eventually. I didn't ask many questions, because why would I? He's my father. I trusted him completely. And now? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Now I've actually looked at the records. Really looked for the first time, instead of just glancing at the quarterly summaries he sent me. Derek scrolled down the statement, highlighting transaction after transaction. Over the past 2 years, Dad has moved almost $2 million through this account. Not just the money from the house sale, that was only the final piece. He's been systematically draining your joint accounts for years. Small amounts at first, easy to miss, always with plausible explanations. Then larger amounts, transferred when you weren't paying attention, when you were traveling, or busy, or distracted. He's been stealing from you for years. Mom, right under your nose, right under all of our noses. I stared at the numbers on the screen, trying to make them make sense. $2 million. Our retirement savings, our investments, our emergency fund, all of it, funneled through this company I'd never heard of. Moved to accounts I couldn't access. Where did it go? I asked. Where's the money now? That's what I've been trying to figure out for the past 2 weeks. Derek opened the manila folder and spread papers across the table. Wire transfer confirmations, bank statements, corporate filings, a maze of financial documents that represented the dismantling of my life. These are wire transfer records I was able to access through my partnership in Lighthouse Holdings. The money has been sent to 3 different offshore accounts, one in the Cayman Islands, one in Switzerland, and one in Singapore. Classic tax havens. Places where money goes when people want it to disappear. Places where U.S. investigators have limited jurisdiction and no easy way to trace funds. Your father has been hiding money offshore, I said. It wasn't really a question. The evidence was right there in front of me. He's been building a whole second life, Derek said, his voice cracking. Look at this. He pulled out another document. This one a lease agreement for an apartment. The address was in Miami, a high-rise building in a trendy neighborhood, the kind of place that costs thousands a month in rent. My husband's name was on the lease. The start date was 18 months ago. He's been paying rent on this apartment for a year and a half. Mom, while living with you, while eating dinner at your table, while sleeping in your bed. He had a whole other residence, a whole other life, and none of us knew. An apartment in Miami, I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. Why would he need an apartment in Miami? Derek's face contorted with pain, the expression of a son about to destroy his mother's last illusion about his father. Because that's where she lives, he said. There's more, Mom. I found photographs, in his email account, in his cloud storage, in places he thought no one would ever look. I wasn't snooping. I was trying to find evidence about the money, and I stumbled onto these instead. Photos of Dad with another woman. A woman named Carla. They've been together for at least 3 years, maybe longer. He turned the laptop again, and my world collapsed into a single image. My husband of 35 years, the father of my children, the man I'd built my entire adult life around, with his arm wrapped around a woman I'd never seen before. She was younger than me, by at least 15 years, blonde where I was dark, slender where I was not, wearing a sundress and a carefree smile that spoke of someone without 35 years of marriage weighing her down. They were standing on a beach, palm trees visible in the background, both looking relaxed and happy and completely in love. The way Raymond used to look at me, decades ago, before whatever we'd had turned into something else. No, I said. The word came out as a whisper, barely audible even to myself. No, this can't be real. This has to be some kind of mistake. I wish it were, Derek said, tears streaming down his face now. I wish I could tell you these photos were faked, that someone was trying to frame Dad, that there's an innocent explanation for all of this. But there isn't, Mom. I verified everything, the apartment lease, the offshore accounts, the photos, all of it. Dad has been planning to leave you for years. The house sale was the final step, the last piece of the puzzle. He needed to liquidate your biggest shared asset and get the money offshore before filing for divorce. Once the money was in the Caymans, you'd never be able to touch it. You'd be left with nothing, while he started a new life in Miami with his girlfriend. But the signature was forged, I said. He couldn't sell the house without my consent. That's what I don't understand, Derek admitted. Why forge your signature? Why involve Helen? Why do it so sloppily that an expired notary would be used? Dad is smarter than that. He's been planning this for years. Why would he make such obvious mistakes at the end? I thought about Helen's words from yesterday. Maybe we've both been played, and suddenly a new possibility occurred to me. What if he didn't make those mistakes? I said slowly. What if someone else did? What do you mean? Helen handled the paperwork. Helen found the notary. Helen rushed the sale through without proper verification. What if she wasn't just facilitating the transaction? What if she was sabotaging it? Derek frowned. Why would Helen sabotage her own purchase? Because she's your mother-in-law, I said. Because she knows Sandra. Because maybe, just maybe, she found out what your father was really doing and decided to leave a trail of evidence that would blow the whole thing up. That's a lot of maybes, Derek said. It is. But think about it. Helen is a successful real estate agent. She knows exactly how property transfers work. She would never use an expired notary unless she wanted the sale to be invalidated. She would never accept a forged signature unless she wanted it to be discovered. She set the whole thing up to fail. But why? Derek asked. What does she gain from that? I don't know yet, I said, but I intend to find out. I went back to Helen's office that afternoon, my mind churning with the new theory I'd developed. This time she was expecting me. The receptionist waved me through without question, and Helen met me at the door to her corner office, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes watchful. She led me to a small conference room away from the main office, closed the door and pulled the blinds shut. Then she sat across from me, folded her hands on the table, and waited. You figured it out, she said finally. It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement. She'd been waiting for this moment, perhaps even hoping for it. The expired notary, I said, laying out my theory with the precision of a prosecutor. The obviously forged signature, the transaction full of holes that any competent investigator would spot immediately. You wanted the sale to be invalidated. You wanted someone to find the problems. Helen nodded slowly, her expression shifting from neutral to something like relief. I wanted to leave you a way out. I wanted to make sure that when the truth came out, and the truth always comes out eventually, Vivian, no matter how deeply people try to bury it, you'd have the evidence you needed to get your house back. The expired notary was deliberate. I could have found a licensed notary in 5 minutes, but I chose Patricia Vance specifically because I knew her commission had lapsed. I chose her because her involvement would invalidate the entire transaction if anyone thought to check. Why? I demanded. You don't owe me anything. We've sat across from each other at maybe a dozen family dinners. We've made small talk at Derek and Sandra's wedding, at Christmas parties, at that 4th of July barbecue 2 years ago. You barely know me. Why would you risk your reputation, your business, your relationship with your daughter's in-laws, to sabotage a transaction that was going to make you money? Because I know Sandra, Helen said simply. I know my daughter better than I know anyone else on this earth. I raised her alone after her father died when she was 6. I worked 80-hour weeks to build this business so she'd have opportunities I never had. I watched her grow up, fall in love, get married, start building a life of her own. And I know what Raymond has been doing to your family, to all of us, for the past 3 years. I couldn't stand by and watch him destroy everyone around him while escaping to Miami with his mistress and your money. It's not right. It's not fair. And after 20 years in real estate, I know exactly how people hide assets and exactly how to expose them when they do. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a photo. She turned the screen toward me, and my breath caught in my throat. It was the same woman from Derek's files, Carla, the blonde, the mistress, but in this photo, she was standing next to Sandra at what looked like a corporate networking event. Both women were holding wine glasses, both smiling at the camera, both looking like colleagues or perhaps friends. Sandra introduced them, Helen said quietly. 3 years ago, at a charity gala for the hospital foundation. Sandra was working at a marketing firm downtown. She'd just been promoted to account manager. Carla was a client, some kind of hospitality consultant who needed branding work. Sandra thought Carla would be a good networking contact for Raymond's side business. He was doing some consulting work at the time. Remember? She was just trying to help, trying to make connections that would benefit the family. She had no idea what she was setting in motion. Sandra introduced her own father-in-law to the woman who would become his mistress, I said, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. Unknowingly, innocently, she was 27 years old, newly married, just starting to navigate the complicated waters of having 2 families to balance. She was trying to be helpful. She was trying to show Raymond that she valued him, that she wanted to contribute to his success. But Raymond saw something else entirely. He saw an attractive woman, 15 years younger than his wife. He saw an opportunity to start over. He saw an escape route from a marriage he'd apparently grown tired of. And he took it. When did Sandra find out? I asked. 6 months ago. Helen's voice hardened with old anger. She was helping Raymond with some paperwork for his consulting business. He'd asked her to organize some files for tax purposes. She stumbled onto emails she wasn't supposed to see. Explicit emails, photos, plans for the Miami apartment, references to offshore accounts, and phase 2 of something called Project Lighthouse. She was devastated. Vivian. Absolutely shattered. She called me that night, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She said she'd ruined everything. She said she'd destroyed your marriage by introducing Raymond to that woman. She blamed herself for all of it. It wasn't her fault, I said automatically, the maternal instinct kicking in even for a daughter-in-law I barely knew. I know that. You know that. But Sandra has spent 6 months drowning in guilt anyway. She wanted to tell you immediately, to warn you about what Raymond was planning, to give you time to protect yourself. But I convinced her to wait. I told her we needed to gather evidence, build an airtight case, make sure Raymond couldn't wriggle out of the consequences when everything came to light. If we'd warned you too soon, he might have accelerated his timeline. He might have gotten the money offshore faster. He might have found ways to cover his tracks that we couldn't anticipate. So we waited. We watched. We documented everything he did. And you bought my house, I said. As part of this plan. I bought your house to control the transaction, Helen confirmed. Raymond was going to sell it regardless. He needed that $400,000 to finalize his escape plan. He needed liquid capital in the offshore accounts to support the life he was building in Miami. If I hadn't purchased the property, someone else would have. Someone who wouldn't have left breadcrumbs for you to follow, someone who wouldn't have used an expired notary or accepted an obviously forged signature. By inserting myself into the transaction, I could ensure that the fraud would be discovered eventually. I could give you the evidence you needed to fight back. So you've been on my side this whole time, I said slowly. Even when I was accusing you of stealing my home, I couldn't tell you the truth until you were ready to hear it, Helen said. If I'd approached you 6 months ago and said your husband is planning to leave you and I'm working with your daughter-in-law to expose him, would you have believed me? Or would you have defended Raymond, dismissed my claims as jealousy or misunderstanding, maybe even warned him that people were suspicious? I wanted to argue, but I knew she was right. 6 months ago, I would have defended Raymond to my last breath. I would have made excuses for any suspicious behavior. I would have chosen loyalty to my husband over truth from a woman I barely knew. What happens now? I asked. Now we take everything to the authorities, Helen said. The forged signature, the expired notary, the offshore accounts, the evidence of Raymond's affair and his plans to flee. We build a case so solid that he can't escape the consequences. And we get you your house back, not just as joint property with a man who betrayed you, but as yours alone, free and clear, the foundation for whatever life you want to build next. And what about you? I asked. You've spent $400,000 on a property you never intended to keep. You've taken enormous risks with your professional reputation. What do you get out of this? Helen smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. I get to watch my daughter sleep at night without being eaten alive by guilt. I get to see a good woman, you, Vivian, get justice instead of being victimized by a con man. And I get the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the good guys actually win. She paused. Besides, once the sale is invalidated, I'll get my $400,000 back. I'm not losing money on this, just tying it up temporarily in a good cause. I sat back, trying to process everything. My husband of 35 years had been planning to leave me. My son had been an unwitting accomplice to the financial conspiracy. My daughter-in-law had accidentally introduced the other woman. And Helen, the woman I'd suspected of being the villain, had actually been working to expose the truth and protect me. The house, I said. Why did you actually buy it? To control the transaction, Helen said. Raymond was going to sell it regardless. He needed the money to finalize his escape plan. If I hadn't bought it, someone else would have. Someone who might not leave such obvious holes in the paperwork. By purchasing it myself, I could ensure that the fraud would be discovered. I could give you the evidence you needed to fight back. But you still own my house, I said. You're still the legal owner. For now, Helen said. Once the forgery is proven and the sale is invalidated, the property will revert to joint ownership. At that point, you can file for divorce and claim your half. Raymond won't be able to hide the offshore accounts forever. The IRS is very interested in unreported foreign assets. When everything comes out, you'll be entitled to far more than just the house. And what do you get out of this? I asked. Why go to all this trouble? Helen's expression softened. Sandra is my only daughter. Derek is her husband. Your family and my family are connected now, whether we like it or not. I couldn't stand by and watch Raymond destroy everyone around him while escaping to Miami with his mistress. It's not right. It's not fair. And I've spent 20 years in real estate, learning exactly how people hide assets and how to expose them when they do. Thank you, I said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. Don't thank me yet, Helen said. We still have to prove the forgery. We still have to get your house back. We still have to make sure Raymond faces consequences for what he's done. The fight isn't over, it's just beginning. The fight lasted 8 months. 8 months of depositions and forensic examinations and court hearings, 8 months of my life on hold, while lawyers argued over signatures and notary licenses and offshore account records. The forensic examiner confirmed what I'd known from the start. The signature on the deed wasn't mine. It was close. Someone had studied my handwriting carefully, but there were subtle differences in pressure and stroke order that no forger could perfectly replicate. Combined with the expired notary and my documented presence at the hospital that day, the evidence was overwhelming. Raymond's lawyer tried to argue that I'd signed the document at a different time and the date had simply been recorded incorrectly. He tried to argue that the notary's expired license was an innocent mistake. He tried to argue that the offshore accounts were legitimate investment vehicles. None of it held up. The judge invalidated the sale in June, ordering the property returned to joint ownership pending divorce proceedings. He also referred the case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Raymond was charged with forgery, fraud, and tax evasion. He posted bail but was ordered to surrender his passport. His dream of escaping to Miami with Carla was officially dead. The divorce was finalized in September. I got the house, 70% of our liquid assets, and a significant portion of the money recovered from the offshore accounts. Raymond got supervised visitation with any future grandchildren, a criminal record, and the satisfaction of knowing he'd destroyed his own life through his own greed. Carla disappeared somewhere along the way. Once the money stopped flowing and the legal troubles mounted, she apparently decided Raymond wasn't worth the hassle. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to California with a new boyfriend, some tech entrepreneur who didn't have pending federal charges hanging over his head. I moved back into the house on a crisp October day, exactly 1 year after that first hearing, when the judge had told me I no longer owned my home. Derek and Sandra helped me carry boxes. Helen brought champagne. My daughter Melissa flew in from Seattle with her family. We stood in the living room I'd thought I'd lost forever and toasted to new beginnings. To Mom, Derek said, raising his glass, who never stopped fighting. To Vivian, Helen added, who trusted us when she had every reason not to. To family, I said, the one we're born with and the one we choose. We drank, we laughed, we cried a little, and then we got to work cleaning up the mess Raymond had left behind. The house needed repairs. After months of vacancy, the garden had gone wild, the shutters needed repainting, the gutters needed clearing, the furnace needed servicing, but it was mine again. Truly mine, not jointly owned with a man who'd spent 3 years planning to betray me. I threw myself into the work. I hired contractors and supervised renovations. I pulled weeds and planted new flowers. I repainted rooms in colors I'd always wanted. But Raymond had vetoed. The house that had been our shared space became my space, reflecting my tastes and my vision and my plans for the future. Derek came over every weekend to help. He was still processing his own guilt about Lighthouse Holdings, still trying to reconcile the father he'd admired with the man who'd tried to steal from his own mother. We worked side by side in the garden, hands in the dirt, rebuilding something that had been damaged. I should have known, he said one afternoon. I should have asked more questions about the company, about where the money was going. I was naive. You trusted your father, I said. That's not naivety, that's love. It feels like stupidity. Then learn from it, I said. Ask questions. Demand transparency. Don't let anyone, even family, especially family, operate in secrecy. But don't beat yourself up for having faith in someone who was supposed to be trustworthy. He betrayed that faith. That's his failure, not yours. Derek nodded slowly. Sandra says the same thing. She blames herself for introducing Dad to Carla. I keep telling her it wasn't her fault, that she couldn't have known, that Dad made his own choices. But I understand the guilt now. When someone you love does something terrible, you wonder if you could have stopped it. You wonder if you missed the signs. You wonder if part of the blame belongs to you. It doesn't, I said firmly. Raymond chose to have an affair. Raymond chose to hide money offshore. Raymond chose to forge my signature and steal our house. Those were his choices, made by him, for his benefit. We're not responsible for the things he did to us. I know, Derek said. But it's hard to believe sometimes. It gets easier, I said. With time, with distance, with the knowledge that we survived and he didn't. Did he really not survive? Derek asked. I mean, he's out on bail, he's got lawyers fighting his charges, he might actually avoid prison. He lost everything that mattered, I said. His family, his reputation, his freedom to travel, his mistress, his comfortable life. Even if he avoids prison, he'll spend the rest of his years knowing that everyone sees him for what he really is. That's a kind of death too. Derek considered that. I haven't talked to him since the indictment, he said. I don't know if I ever will. He keeps calling, leaving voicemails, asking to explain, but I don't know what explanation could possibly make this okay. There isn't one, I said. Some things can't be explained or justified or forgiven. Some betrayals are too deep. You don't have to talk to him if you don't want to. You don't owe him anything. He's my father, Derek said quietly. He was, I said. But fathers are supposed to protect their families, not destroy them. He gave up the right to call himself your father when he started planning to abandon us. We worked in silence for a while. After that, the only sounds the scrape of shovels and the rustle of leaves. When the sun started to set, Derek helped me carry the tools back to the garage and hugged me goodbye. Same time next week? He asked. Same time, I said. We're almost done with the back beds, then we can start on the vegetable garden. He smiled, a real smile, the first I'd seen from him in months. Dad always hated that vegetable garden, said it was a waste of space. Good thing he doesn't get a vote anymore, I said. Derek laughed and drove away. I stood in my driveway, watching his taillights disappear, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. The criminal trial happened the following spring, after months of investigation and grand jury proceedings and the slow grinding of the justice system. I sat in the courtroom every day, in the same seat in the third row, watching Raymond face the consequences of choices he'd made years ago when he thought no one was watching. The courtroom was packed, apparently a doctor defrauding his wife of millions while planning to flee to Miami with his mistress, made for compelling local news. Reporters sketched furiously. Cameras weren't allowed, but the press filled the gallery anyway, hungry for details they could spin into headlines. Raymond's lawyer was expensive, paid for, I later learned, with money Raymond had managed to hide even from Helen's investigation. He argued for leniency, with every tool in his legal arsenal. He cited Raymond's clean record, spanning 6 decades. He mentioned his community service, the charity boards he'd sat on, the hospital committees he'd chaired. He spoke of the stress of a deteriorating marriage, implying, without quite saying, that I had somehow driven Raymond to his crimes through coldness or inattention or some feminine failing that justified his betrayal. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Reyes, who'd made her career putting white-collar criminals in prison, countered every argument with evidence. She showed the jury 3 years of calculated deception, the fake company, the forged documents, the offshore accounts, the systematic theft of nearly $2 million from a woman who trusted her husband completely. She showed them the photographs from Miami, the lease agreement, the emails between Raymond and Carla, planning their new life together. She showed them the forgery expert's testimony, proving beyond reasonable doubt that I had never signed that deed. This wasn't a moment of weakness, Catherine Reyes told the jury in her closing argument. This wasn't a man making a desperate decision under pressure. This was a 3-year campaign of fraud, deception, and theft. Raymond Patterson didn't just betray his wife, he systematically dismantled her life while smiling at her across the breakfast table. He forged her signature on a document that stole her home. He hid nearly $2 million in offshore accounts she couldn't access. He was days away from disappearing to Miami with his mistress, leaving his wife of 35 years with nothing. This is not the behavior of a good man who made a mistake. This is the behavior of a predator. The jury deliberated for 2 days. I spent those 48 hours unable to eat, unable to sleep, pacing the halls of my reclaimed house and waiting for the phone to ring. Derek stayed with me, sleeping on the couch, making me cups of tea I couldn't drink, offering comfort I couldn't quite accept. Sandra called every few hours to check in. Helen sent flowers with a note that said simply, "Justice is coming." When the verdict came, I was sitting in the front row of the courtroom, my hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The foreman stood, a middle-aged man with a tired face and a wedding ring that glinted in the fluorescent light, and read the jury's decision. Guilty, on all counts. Forgery, fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Every charge the prosecution had brought, the jury had affirmed. Raymond didn't react. He sat motionless at the defense table, his face blank, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance that only he could see. He didn't look at me. He hadn't looked at me once during the entire trial, not during jury selection, not during testimony, not during closing arguments. It was as if I'd ceased to exist for him. The moment his scheme fell apart, or maybe I'd never really existed for him at all. Maybe I'd always just been an obstacle to be overcome, a source of assets to be plundered, a stepping stone on his path to the life he really wanted. The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, Raymond was remanded to custody. His passport had been surrendered long ago, but the judge deemed him a flight risk given his offshore assets and his demonstrated willingness to abandon his life. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, and I watched him go, this man I'd slept beside for 35 years, this stranger I'd apparently never known at all. Outside the courthouse, the spring air was warm and sweet with the smell of flowering trees. Reporters gathered around me, shouting questions I had no intention of answering. Derek and Sandra flanked me, creating a barrier between me and the cameras. Helen waited by her car, ready to drive me home. "How do you feel, Mrs. Patterson?" one reporter called out, shoving a microphone toward my face. How did I feel? I felt hollow, exhausted, relieved that it was over, and terrified of what came next. I felt grief for the marriage I'd thought I had, and rage at the man who'd made a fool of me for years. I felt gratitude for the family that had stood by me, and guilt for the ways I doubted them. I felt like a survivor of a disaster I hadn't seen coming, standing in the wreckage of my old life, not sure yet how to build a new one. But I said none of that. Instead, I walked past the reporters, without a word, got into Helen's car, and let her drive me home to the house I'd almost lost, the house that was finally irrevocably mine. The judge sentenced Raymond to 5 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 3. It was less than the prosecution had asked for. Catherine Reyes had pushed for 8 years, citing the systematic nature of the fraud and the devastating impact on the victim, but more than the defense had hoped for. Raymond's lawyer had argued for probation, citing his age and his lack of prior criminal history. The judge disagreed. "Mr. Patterson," the judge said, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom, "you have violated the trust of the person closest to you in the most fundamental way possible. You stole from your wife. You forged her signature. You conspired to leave her destitute while you escaped to a new life with another woman. The fact that you were caught before you could complete your scheme does not mitigate your culpability. You planned this. You executed it over years. You showed no remorse, only frustration at being caught. I am sentencing you to 5 years in federal prison. I hope that time gives you an opportunity to reflect on the damage you have done, not just to your wife, but to your children, your grandchildren, and everyone else who trusted you." Raymond stood to hear his sentence. He still didn't look at me. He still didn't apologize. He was led away by federal marshals, and I watched him disappear through a side door into a future of concrete walls and institutional meals and the slow grinding monotony of incarceration. It wasn't enough. 5 years wasn't enough for 35 years of marriage, for 3 years of betrayal, for $2 million stolen, and a lifetime of trust destroyed. But it was something. It was accountability. It was the world finally saying that what he'd done was wrong, that I hadn't imagined it, that I wasn't crazy or paranoid or difficult. I'd been victimized by a man who was supposed to love me, and now he was paying the price. I left the courtroom that day and drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried. I sat beside their graves for an hour, telling them everything that had happened, apologizing for not visiting more often, thanking them for raising me to be strong enough to survive this. Then I drove home, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat in my garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was over. Finally. Mercifully. Impossibly over. And somehow, despite everything, I was still standing. Helen came over that evening with a bottle of wine. We sat on the porch and watched the sunset, two women who'd started as adversaries and ended as something like friends. "Thank you," I said, "for everything, for taking the risk, for leaving the breadcrumbs, for helping me find my way back." "You would have found it anyway," Helen said. "You're stronger than you know, Vivian, stronger than Raymond ever gave you credit for." "Maybe," I said, "but it would have been harder without you, without Derek and Sandra, without everyone who believed me when I said the signature wasn't mine." "Family believes family," Helen said. "That's how it's supposed to work. Raymond forgot that. He thought he could betray everyone who trusted him and get away with it. He was wrong." "He was wrong about a lot of things," I said. "Yes," Helen agreed. "But that's his burden now, not yours." We finished the wine as the stars came out. Then Helen went home, and I sat alone in my garden, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of traffic, feeling the peace of a battle finally won. 2 years later, I hosted Thanksgiving at my house, for the first time since everything had fallen apart. The dining room was full to bursting with people I loved. Derek and Sandra with their new baby Emma, who was 6 months old and already the center of everyone's universe. Melissa and her family had flown in from Seattle, her husband James, their two teenagers who'd rather be on their phones than talk to adults, and their golden retriever Max, who had to stay in the backyard because he couldn't be trusted around food. Helen and her husband Robert were there. My sister Carol, who'd finally moved back from Florida after her own divorce, had helped me cook all day. We crowded around the table I'd eaten at for 35 years, the same table where Raymond had sat for decades, pretending to be someone he wasn't. I'd thought about replacing it, but in the end, I decided to keep it. The table wasn't guilty. The table was just a table, and I wasn't going to let Raymond take one more thing from me. "To Grandma," Derek said, raising his glass. Little Emma gurgled contentedly in Sandra's arms, reaching for the shiny wine glass her father was holding. "For teaching us that family is worth fighting for. For showing us what courage looks like when everything seems lost. For never giving up, even when it would have been easier to walk away." "To Mom," Melissa added, tears glistening in her eyes. "For proving that women don't have to accept being treated badly just because it's easier than fighting. For showing her grandchildren, especially her granddaughter, that strength isn't about being tough. It's about getting back up every time life knocks you down." "To Vivian," Helen said, her voice warm with genuine affection, "who trusted us when she had every reason not to. Who gave us the chance to help her even when we'd been keeping secrets for months. Who forgave us, forgave me, for not telling her sooner what her husband was doing." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I smiled through them. "To all of us," I said, lifting my glass. "For being here. For choosing each other. For proving that the bonds we build through love and loyalty are stronger than the ones we're born into. To family, the real kind." We drank. The clink of glasses was like music. Then we ate, passing dishes around the table, laughing at old stories and making new memories. The turkey was golden and perfect. The stuffing was my mother's recipe. The cranberry sauce was homemade, not canned, because some things deserve the extra effort. After dinner, I stood at the kitchen window, washing dishes by hand. Through the glass, I could see my family scattered through the living room. Derek showing Emma the Christmas tree, Sandra laughing at something. Helen said, Melissa's teenagers actually talking to each other instead of staring at screens. Carol was helping Robert find the football game on TV. James was teaching Max to shake hands through the sliding glass door. This was what Raymond had tried to destroy. This warmth, this connection, this sense of belonging and being belonged to. He'd wanted to take everything from me. My house, my money, my dignity, my future, and disappear to Miami with his mistress. He'd wanted to leave me with nothing. But he'd failed. He was in a federal prison cell right now, eating institutional food and counting days until parole. His girlfriend Carla had left him 3 months into his sentence. His Miami dream was dead. And here I was, surrounded by everyone who mattered, in the house he'd tried to steal, living a life richer than anything I'd had when married to him. He'd lost everything. I'd lost only him. And honestly, that was no loss at all. The dishes were done. I dried my hands on a sunflower-embroidered towel, a gift from Carol, and joined my family. Emma reached for me immediately, and I took her in my arms. She grabbed my finger and held tight, with that absolute trust babies have. "I've got you," I whispered. "I've got all of you." And I did. Despite everything, the betrayal, the theft, the forgery, the battles, I had my family, my home, my garden, my future. Raymond had tried to take all of that. But some things can't be stolen. Some things are too strong to break. Love, loyalty, the bonds we choose to honor day after day, those endure beyond any forged document, any offshore account, any scheme. I'd learned that the hard way, but I'd learned it, and I'd never forget. 5 years after the court case, I wrote a book about my experience, not for revenge, but to help other women facing similar betrayals. I called it My Name on the Line: How I Fought Back Against Fraud and Reclaimed My Life. It sold modestly, but found its audience. I received letters from women across the country, wives who'd discovered forged signatures, partners who'd found hidden accounts, mothers who'd lost homes to schemes they never saw coming. I answered every letter, offering advice and resources, and the simple comfort of knowing they weren't alone. Some wrote back years later to tell me how their cases ended. Some had won, others had lost, but all of them said the same thing. Knowing someone else had survived, this helped them keep fighting. Derek and Sandra had 2 more children, Marcus and Rose. I watched them grow up in the house that was almost stolen from me, running through the garden I'd rebuilt, playing in rooms I'd painted colors. Raymond never would have allowed. They knew that Grandpa had done something wrong and had to go away. The details could wait until they were older. Raymond was released after 3 years. He moved to Arizona, started over at a car dealership, and occasionally sent birthday cards. The kids never answered. Some bridges, once burned, stay burned. I never spoke to him again, not from hatred that had faded, but from the simple recognition that we had nothing left to say. 35 years of marriage, 3 years of betrayal, then silence. It seemed right. Helen became a genuine friend. We had dinner monthly, swapping stories about grandchildren and gardens. She'd taken an enormous risk by sabotaging that property sale, and it had paid off. I owed her more than I could ever repay. "You don't owe me anything," she always said. "You would have done the same for Sandra." Maybe I would have. Maybe that's what family does, protects each other, even when it's complicated, even when there's risk. I'm 70 now. The house is paid off. The garden thrives. My family visits every chance they get. I've built a life Raymond tried to destroy, and it's more beautiful than anything we had together. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the woman who sat on that courthouse bench, clutching fraudulent documents, wondering how everything had fallen apart. I want to reach back through time and tell her it will be okay. The fight is worth it. The worst moment of her life is also the beginning of her transformation. But she couldn't have heard me. She had to walk the path herself, step by painful step. That's how strength is built. Not by avoiding pain, but by walking through it. The judge told me my house no longer belonged to me. He was wrong. The house was always mine. Mine to fight for, mine to reclaim, mine to fill with love and laughter and life. Some things can't be transferred by forged documents. Some things are written in something stronger than ink. The 32 years I spent in that house, the children I raised there, the garden I planted and tended and watched bloom through decades of seasons, those things became part of the house's foundation, woven into its walls, absorbed by its floors. No signature, forged or real, could ever take that away. And it will stay mine as long as I'm breathing, because some things are worth fighting for with everything you have. Some things are too precious to surrender to thieves and liars. Home, family, dignity, the truth of who you are and what you deserve. You just have to be willing to fight for them. No matter how long the battle takes, no matter how hard the path becomes, no matter how many people tell you to give up and accept your losses and move on with whatever scraps they've left you. I never gave up. I never accepted defeat. I never walked away until I'd gotten back everything that was taken from me, and more, because in the process of fighting for my house, I found something I'd lost years ago: myself, my strength, my voice, my willingness to stand up and say no when someone tried to take what was mine. Raymond thought he could steal my life. He thought 35 years of marriage entitled him to take everything and leave me with nothing. He thought I was weak, passive, the kind of woman who would accept her losses and fade quietly into the background. He underestimated me. He underestimated the strength that comes from fighting for something you love. He underestimated the power of families standing together against injustice. He underestimated the determination of a woman who refuses to be a victim. His mistake, his failure, his loss, and that made all the difference.